Hi, my name is Jack and welcome to the review. I didn't mean to split this up into two parts, but I went a little overzealous on the post gameplay commentary. So I thought, you know what, I'm just going to make this as a part 2 and go about it. So let's begin. Now that you've survived the gameplay experience of the Chamber of Sasscrets, I welcome you to the review part of this commentary, where I review the game in question and give it a unique rating from a system of ratings I came up with. I'll shortly explain how this will go. I have 4 sections I'll talk about in relation to the game, those being gameplay, story, audio, and graphical fidelity. Each of these are a 4-point, technically a 5-point since I can put zeros into them. They are my scales after all. Set of scales that add up to a single number, and accompanying that number is one of 4 possible ratings I can give the game: lucid dream, dream, fever dream, and nightmare. So let's get right into it then. The first thing I would like to comment on when it comes to the gameplay is this. The gameplay suffers greatly from the horrible camera controls. The game has a sort of semi-tank camera control system that takes place when you walk around, and moving the camera left or right or up or down doesn't really work all that well. For those who don't know, tank controls are a system of controls where the player movement is relative to the player's position. When you press forward, you move forward, and pressing left or right turns the character in that direction until you press forward again. The most famous series that has tank controls is probably the Resident Evil series, though this comes from the older games and not the more recent games in the series. Harry isn't exactly controlled like a Resident Evil game, however, with spinning around when pressing left or right being the way to swivel him in place, but the game's camera does heavily affect movement when you are playing. On top of that, with how strict the movement of the camera is while moving, or hell, even standing still, they almost force you to use the camera redirect button. It's like they intended for you to play the game without moving the camera at all, and instead rely on the L button in order to automatically snap the camera behind Harry. Truthfully, this is the reason behind a lot of my gripes with the gameplay, but we'll continue on regardless. There are quite a few differences to this game from the previous, and I'll be using the first game, the Philosopher's Stone as I call it, as a comparison because they do have similar gameplay styles. The first and biggest difference in gameplay that we see is, of course, the camera, but alongside that, we see that there are far more spells we'll be unlocking throughout the game. My favorite spell, Spongify, isn't in this game, which is a travesty, but I digress. The menu is far more navigable now and much less confusing, though there never seems to be a reason to use the map they provide you, since every area is pretty straightforward and very linear. It's almost like they thought this game was going to be like an open world style game. It isn't. The beginning of the game teaches you pretty much all that you need to know about the game. Assign a button to a spell, press that button to cast, hold the button to cast a powerful version, press L to target, and A to dodge in a direction you tilt the control stick forwards. Aside from the basic gameplay controls, you can also do things such as pushing blocks and pressing large buttons with the A button, pushing the control stick forward slowly in order to sneak, and climb or jump by pushing against whatever can be climbed or jumped across with the control stick. Before we get into the gameplay loop, I would like to mention that there is one single spell that you have to collect 100 flavored beans in order to unlock, which is odd, but it was kind of an enjoyable experience to collect all 100 and try to maintain them when you lose about 3 to 5 whenever you're hit. Also take note that we have to save at floating scrolls placed around the environment instead of being able to save from the menu itself. That isn't that big of an issue since I rarely found a necessity in saving before really anything at all. The only thing I really ever saved in front of were the classes, but sometimes I forgot to save entirely and almost always remembered the time I was 8 years old and nearly died choking on a corn on the cob. Why? Because it was a very traumatic experience and I don't like corn because of it. And it was also very embarrassing because there was more than just me and my parents in the room. It was during Thanksgiving. Alright, that's a little too much information. But card collecting is back, I guess. That doesn't really do anything for gameplay, though, so I mean, yeah. I do find it odd that throughout the entirety of the game, the main spell acquisition process through the spell challenge dungeons are simultaneously the most annoying and least enjoyable parts of the game. In contrast, obtaining the remaining spells outside of those dungeons are actually quite enjoyable and often far easier. The word challenge is in that first set of words, yes, but the gameplay difference between the spell challenge dungeons and the rest of the game is surprisingly more significant than I would have expected. The puzzles aren't difficult, the combat isn't all that much more difficult than the puzzles, it's just the movement that restricts the enjoyment of the challenge dungeons. As you acquire the non-challenge dungeon spells, you find yourself going up against plants, murderous bookshelves, and even bean collecting. The way I worded that was weird. But all of which are much more fun than the challenge dungeons themselves. You obtain Flipendo and Lumos nearly at the same time, with Lumos being just after the game's tutorial. Defindo is obtained when needing to save Neville from behind a large curtain in the Gryffindor common room, and Scourge is obtained when Harry traverses the forbidden section. When it comes to spell challenge dungeons, I'll certainly point to Avafor's as being the worst of the dungeons. Not only does it showcase the issues with the gameplay involving the camera, but it also showcases an interesting mechanic that was taken out of the game from the previous one. Lumos no longer affects the ghosts. In the previous game, you'd have to shine your Lumos light on the ghosts in order to ward them off, but the ghosts are just free to do as they please now. And since the ghosts can't be avoided if you're on a smaller platform, the Avafor dungeons is really just a race against time before you lose all of your health to the ghost. It's the only dungeon where I willingly quit the game twice so I wouldn't die in it, since I had saved just before the class. In fact, it's only just before classes that I ever did save because of how frustratingly annoying that they were in regards to gameplay. The gameplay in each dungeon turns out to be pretty similar to one another, so I'll cover the basic loop of the class dungeons. When you first enter a dungeon, you find yourself in an area where you must use a spell you previously obtained, most of the time the literal last spell you obtained in the game, in order to create a path in the next area, which tends to be harder and more tedious than the previous one. The next section, you have to use an additional spell you found, most often Lumos or Flipendo, before finally achieving the spell in the dungeon. Then you have to use that spell to escape the room and reach the exit, with gargoyles stopping you, so you have to use Expelliarmus to defeat them. Take that format and slap it down onto any of the other dungeons, maybe mix the contents up a bit and attach different visuals to each one, and you've got it down to a T. Now they just add enemies that you have to deal with in some way, though mostly ghosts, fire-shooting beetles, or gargoyles, only one of which you can stop, and some parkour. The rest of the game plays out similarly, come to think of it, except for the sneaking missions, which tend to be more annoying than the dungeons, really. They rely on you sneaking around with a weird gyroscope movement, isometric camera, whatever you want to call it. That's the best way I can describe it, honestly. There isn't much to say about these parts except this. You sneak past prefects to get to your destination. It's pretty bland, and if you time it right, you don't ever have to use the items they provide you to get past them. Oh yeah, that's right, I forgot to ever mention that there were stink pellets and distraction balloons in the game. They just don't matter whatsoever. Parts of the game also showcase the flying controls. They work similarly to jet controls, where up and down are determined on whether you pull the control stick towards you or push it away, respectively. This game introduces the boost feature as well, which can happen when you fly through enough rings. I believe if my head count was right, it takes 10 rings to boost your speed on a broom. When you press the Y button to boost, you rocket forward at maximum speed, outflying everything on the field, closing a significant amount of distance on the snitch. When you reach the snitch, you have to grab it in a small minigame, which is nice, but it's not good or bad, it's just nice. So it's like a parallel to the rest of the game. Overall, I give the gameplay a 2 out of 4. The camera has a significant hindrance on the game itself and really messes up a lot of the enjoyment that usually can be derived from the game. The repetitiveness of the dungeons is forgivable because each one has a unique and pretty interesting look to them, and they make use of the spells pretty nicely. I mean, you just got the spell, so why would they not make you use it the next chance they possibly get? Boss fights are nice too, though I wish I could have beat up a troll with Spongify this time around. Oh shit, I just realized that we don't get the flying car scene with the Hogwarts Express. Why couldn't we fly the car around the train and try not to get hit? It's not going to hinder the score, but jeez, man. If you ever decide to play this game and expect the story to be 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 or 1-to-3 to the movie or book, then you are in for a massive surprise. There is bare minimum when it comes to story in this game, and it instead takes on its own narrative in order to deliver the typical story beats through its own methods. I mean, of course, it does have the original story by J.K. Rowling, but it certainly doesn't hide the fact that this is a video game, and that takes precedence over getting all of the important details into the viewer's hands. I'm specifically talking about how the beginning of the game doesn't visit the Dursleys before Harry makes it to Hogwarts, and therefore completely cuts out the opening to the movie and book where Ron, Fred, and George break Harry out of the eternal prison that his uncle forced him to live in. British parenting in the 90s was definitely wicked stuff. I would know, I'm an American. We don't even get to experience the lovable Dobby, as he plays Dance Dance Revolution in Harry's room, but with his head instead of his feet. We don't even get to acknowledge that Ron and his brothers pick Harry up on his birthday. That's a moment I think we've all felt once or twice. The crippling sensation that people might forget it's our birthday. Yeah, that one's rough. But all of this, when being translated into gameplay, just won't work well for the methods that they use to enforce the gameplay loop. So it makes complete sense that they took it out and the original story and all the story beats take more of a backseat. Another good example of this is Parcel Tongue. In the first game, it isn't ever established that Harry is a parcel mouth. This is opposed to the first movie and book, where it's revealed that Harry is a parcel mouth when he goes to the zoo. I guess going anywhere with the Dursleys can be considered a dungeon. And he makes the glass protector of a snake habitat disappear. Then he speaks to the snake on accident as it zooms away. When it comes to the gameplay of the first game, however, Parcel Tongue never became relevant, so it would have been wasting space that the devs had to crunch down on in order to make the game. Nowadays, something like that would be a lot easier to implement because game developers, more space, more complex systems, more data. You get the gist of where this is going. Before we go too far into the game development type talk, let's circle back around to the story aspects. In this game, it isn't revealed that Harry is a parcel mouth until after he beats Malfoy post-Expelliarmus challenge room, when Malfoy summons a snake to attack him. Logically, this is the best place to put this information into the game because this is when Harry becomes consciously aware of it canonically, and it makes the most sense from a storytelling angle. Sorry, I cannot speak. Another interesting bit of story comes in the form of the gameplay's way to allow you to acquire spells, things like the spell challenge dungeons. Looking at these from a story angle is kind of thrilling if I'm being honest, and quite annoying that I feel like I have to write about these because it's just a gameplay progression method if I'm lying to you. Was I really lying to you there? Or was I lying when I said I was lying? You'll never know. The spell challenge dungeons are a fun idea, though executed poorly for a few reasons. Story-wise, they are a little trippy since Harry is the only one that has to do them, which leads up to the funny video game universe canon where Harry is the only student learning spells, hence why he's the most effective against the dangers that oppose Hogwarts. He's like me during all of my chemistry group work because I asked the hot girl in class that I had a crush on to be my partner just so I could talk to her and also help her pass chemistry since I felt bad. I also did the same in our government class. Yeah, I was a Chad, I know. They offer an interesting challenge to how students can learn the spells by engaging their prior spell knowledge against new challenges. Now, if only Lumos would work on ghosts, maybe those challenge dungeons wouldn't be so fucking annoying. You win some, you lose a lot, I guess. Speaking of losing a lot, even though it has nothing to do with losing a lot and I just want a segue of literally any kind, this game does offer quite a funny amount of sass from Harry because of how self-conscious it is of Harry being the one to do everything. He's clearly the hero in this game due to being focused solely on Harry, makes fun of the fact that nobody else can traverse these dungeons with him. There isn't much to talk about with this aside from the fact that I find it very funny whenever Harry suddenly says something about, "You expect me to be the one to help them," and the character talking to him is like, "Oh, thanks for offering, ha ha ha." One of the more explored story aspects here are the Quidditch matches. I find it weird how they explore this aspect in the second year, however, as due to the events that lead to the game's ending, the Chamber of Secrets opening, Professor McGonagall cancelled all of the Quidditch matches for the duration of the second year. This means that Oliver Wood, who pulled Harry onto the team in Harry's first year, is unable to achieve his dream of winning the Quidditch Cup. Odd then that the game actually achieves Oliver's dream by giving Harry the Quidditch Cup at the end of the game, something that doesn't happen in the book or movie canon for the first time until Harry's 5th year, give or take. So really, Oliver's storyline effectively ends here, which makes sense since this is Harry's game series and not Oliver Wood in the Chamber of Quidditch. Outside of these story points, there really aren't any other things in this game worth talking about, besides smaller stuff like how Tom Riddle is a ghost in this game instead of a solidified memory made out of Ginny's energy. So when it comes to the story, despite the inaccuracies to the canon, I believe that this game does a good enough job, of telling Harry's story in second year. I give the story a 3 out of 4. The audio in this game is fairly straightforward. Things such as enemy sounds are back from the first game when it comes to the fire-shooting bugs and the ghosts. Harry sounds the same as everyone has their voice actors from the previous game back for this game, and the sound effects for the returning spells are exactly the same as well. Gnomes sound the same, and what new enemies were added have what seem to be stock sound effects added. All fair choices considering the time that this game came out around. I will compliment the sound of the brooms here though. I'm not sure why, but flying a broom is pretty satisfying because of the sounds that it makes, especially when boosting. Maybe I'm just a child and like fast things going fast. Could be me. My one gripe with the sound is that they took out Harry's voice actor saying the name of the flavored beans whenever he eats them, as well as the name of the pumpkin pastries and cauldron cakes. That really made the game more fun, not in a gameplay way, but it was just always fun to hear for some reason. And the fart sound they replaced it with was funny for a while, but it did get old pretty quick. I ended up just not collecting beans because the interaction with them was either a pretty loud dinging noise or a slowly becoming more repetitive mock-up fart noise. I'm very, very far from an audio engineering genius, but I'm fairly certain this game uses a particular piece of music from Star Wars. Just take a listen. Yeah, that sounds like something out of Star Wars for sure. Like, maybe it was used in Battlefront 1, Battlefront 2, like the ones that came out in the early 2000s. But this game came out before Battlefront 2, so it couldn't be the second one. So it had to have been the first one. It sounds like something you'd find like on the Mos Eisley Cantina map when you're wandering around outside of Mos Eisley, or maybe the Felucia map. I can't quite put my finger on it. I could be going crazy though, but I'm pretty sure it's all crazy similar. Overall, the music is good. The vast majority of the tracks really do give me a Harry Potter vibe, and I only thought of just the one track, known as Day Wandering, as something that came from a different game series or gave a different feeling when listening to it. So I give the overall audio quality a 3 out of 4. The game is a GameCube game. There's really nothing beyond that I can say about it. I don't like to hate on the graphics of games that are very clearly catered towards kids with a more cartoon-looking style. It's just too easy. It was made specifically for them. It isn't stylized in a specific way like Okami or even hyper-surrealist like Psychonauts, but it is certainly catering towards a specific age range of people. So there isn't much to really talk about when it comes to graphical fidelity involving why it looks the way it looks. There is a significant difference between this game's graphics and the games to come later in the series. I believe Goblet of Fire is the first game to really set the realistic looking scene for the series, as that was released around the time that games started becoming more realistic looking instead of going for a cartoony look due to games like Halo or Call of Duty taking center stage on the most popular games of the console generation. When it comes to the graphics and specifically this game, however, it is nice how they attempted to make all of the effects of all the spells more unique. Lumos is a green color, Flipendo is a light blue, Avafors is a darker blue or a light purple. Incendio is a nice flame mimicking spell that has purple tones to it. Alohomora is golden, and although it's pretty straightforward what Alohomora does, it shoots a key straight towards where you aim it. Very nice. All of the spells feel distinct from one another graphically that you won't really get confused on which one you're using. Also, the necessity for each spell is unique graphically as well. For example, you can't clear away things like cobwebs until you get Incendio. And you know you can clear away cobwebs over chests because you go through the Forbidden Forest and burn away spiderwebs with Incendio. Scourge is useful to get rid of ectoplasm, which can be found all over chests and some doorways, and you immediately know you have to use Scourge. Defendo is used to cut down curtains and cut down vines, so whenever you see one or a collection of vines, you immediately know you have to use Defendo. That sort of thing is what I mean by the necessities are graphically unique. And for the most part, Hogwarts looks really good in this art style. It isn't a complete Hogwarts due to graphical limitations, but everywhere you need to go is available. The dungeons are found beneath the castle, the Gryffindor Tower is on the highest floor in the tallest tower. The only sad part is that the portrait into the Gryffindor common room no longer has a 3D rendered model on it, and it is instead a PNG or a JPEG applied to the game, but it isn't the worst loss. The worst loss would go to the Harry Potter Bean voice lines not being in the game. I won't get over that. I should also mention that the Quidditch matches look fine, if only as simple as they could be, and all of the enemies are distinct from one another, and that I never confused a tree nerd for an imp, or the Whomping Willow for Aragog, though only a Nimrod would really confuse those two. When it comes to the graphical fidelity of the game, looking at it from the era it came from and it being on the GameCube, I give the graphics a 4 out of 4. It's all done well enough to where I knew it was happening on screen, I knew what I was looking at all times, I never confused things for one another, and that's good enough for me. With all of the review sections finished, I believe we can finally rate this mother trucker. Considering all of the positives and negatives, this ways and that ways, Malfoys and Potters, Hagrids and more Malfoys, weird animations and dogshit cameras, I do believe that I can say that Harry Potter and the Chamber of Sasscrets runs like a dream. I certainly didn't think it'd be any less than this, since the biggest problem about this game is the camera, and everything else is just me being a nitpicky asshole that doesn't like pepperoni on his pizza, so he picks it off, but still likes the taste of pepperoni anyway, and he's also okay with dipping his grilled cheese into ketchup. That kind of nitpicky behavior, you know? And that concludes Harry Potter and the Chamber of Sasscrets. Next, I'll be moving on to the Prisoner of Azkaban, maybe not, and whatever butchered name I can come up with for that one. Honestly, this was a fun experience to go through. I thoroughly enjoyed playing through the game and writing the script, even if I had to rewrite it 3 times and spent an entire day doing nothing but sitting here trying to think about what exactly I wanted to write about. Writer's block mid-script is absolutely rough, and the sheer amount of deadlines I have in my life right now brought me a severe amount of stress writing it. But I kept trucking on and I finished it. Regardless, it was fun to complete. I sincerely hope you'll stick around to see what else I have in store and what improvements I can make. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, the whole shebang. If you haven't checked out the post commentary, go check that out. My name is Jack. Thank you for watching, and as always, stay lucky.